Hi, and welcome back for episode 7. Now that we've explored the 5 rings individually, we're arriving at something much more intricate, much more revealing, the space where those rings interact. Because no team really operates through isolated disciplines. No team experiences earth without water shaping it, fire without wind moderating it, void without the earth grounding it. Teams live inside the interplay, the dynamic tension, and the constant circulation of these forces. So when people ask why certain patterns emerge in their organizations, why teams lose momentum, why misalignment spreads, why complexity escalates, the answer is always found in this subtle interaction of these network of rings, which I call the mesh. The mesh is an unseen architecture behind delivery. It's the shape formed by the strength or weakness of those rings, or the way the strengths or weaknesses ripple into one another. Once you've learned to see the mesh, you can't unsee it. You walk into meetings and instantly sense which part of the system is overexerting itself to compensate for another part, which is fractured slightly. You observe behaviors, hesitations, overconfidence, avoidance. You understand them not as isolated flaws, but as a symptom of the mesh being out of balance. So this episode is about a deeper understanding, the awareness that delivery is not a machine which you can control, but it's a living structure which you interpret. Now, each team carries the mesh like a sort of energy signature. You can feel it the moment you step into a room. This might sound familiar to you. You feel whether the atmosphere is crispy or muddy, or whether decisions will flow or stall. These are reflections of which rings are dominating and which ones are collapsing. When the earth is strong and the water is strong, the team has the ability to adapt without panic, and you see it in the way they adjust scope without spiraling. But when the water is strong, yet the earth beneath it is not, the team becomes volatile, constantly reshaping itself without retaining any continuity, like a river that's overflowed the banks and now just floods in every direction, but with no real depth. Now, fire without wind becomes destructive. Decisions were made with brilliant confidence, but no real perception of context, leaves behind a trail of rework and frustration. Wind without fire becomes very passive, a team that senses the truth but doesn't act on it, like a pilot who recognizes the storm but refuses to change course. And void, perhaps more than any other ring, reveals the condition of the entire mesh. When void is present, it means that the team has emotional and operational stability. Enough earth to feel grounded, enough water to learn, enough wind to sense, enough fire to decide. But when void collapses, then there's no real space to think or see or imagine. It's almost like the mesh has become stretched to the point of instability. Teams without void, it's not like they're too busy, but it's just a signal that the system can't hold itself together enough to create clarity. I worked in a team before where the stakeholders loved the apparent agility of the team, the ability to handle late changes, respond quickly, and absorb shifting priorities with no complaints. On the surface of this, the flexibility looked like a triumph of water. But something fell off. They rarely pushed back, and they rarely clarified boundaries, and they didn't really question assumptions, and they never really took the time to pause and reflect. So they were moving, but that movement felt sort of frantic. It wasn't until a retro that the nature of the mesh revealed itself. The team admitted that they didn't feel that they had the permission to set boundaries, that every time they tried, they thought they'd be viewed as a blocker. The earth had eroded. And because the earth had eroded, their water, which should have been adaptive, had become chaotic. They were responding without grounding. They were moving without that orientation that earth brings. Fire in that environment struggled to invite because decisions required a sense of stability. And wind was dulled because the team was too overwhelmed to perceive those subtle signals. Void, unsurprisingly, had vanished, and there was simply no mental space left for clarity. The mesh had failed, not because the team had lacked the skill, because one of the rings had collapsed, and that collapse had caused the rest of the system to sag. One of the most fascinating aspects of the mesh is in the way that the teams subconsciously compensate when their ring weakens. When the earth declines, people cling to fire, making decisions faster, pushing harder, asserting certainty to mask the instability beneath. When the fire is missing, water tries to fill the gap, endless reworking, endless circling, endless adaptation that goes nowhere. When the wind wanes, teams will attempt to compensate using the void, stepping back, reflecting, theorizing, but without that awareness to guide the reflection. The void becomes like an intellectual fog. When the void disappears, fire often overextends in an attempt to reassert direction, making bold but misguided decisions that create even more rework. These compensations are not failures, they're survival mechanisms, and over time they become pathologies, patterns of dysfunction that look different on the surface but share the same root. And when you understand the mesh, you begin to interpret team behavior in a completely different way. A slowdown in delivery isn't simply a scheduling issue. It might be the first sign of fire weakening, or wind dulling, or earth fracturing under the load. A surge in meetings might be a sign that the forward is collapsed. A sudden spike in disagreements might be fire attempting to compensate for missing earth. A run of quiet retrospectives might signal that the wind has gone dormant because people no longer feel safe naming the truth. So you stop asking what ceremony is missing and you have to start asking what ring is struggling. That shift will help you understand the mesh better. Now that we've explored the mesh, that living system beneath delivery, it's time to confront the patterns that emerge when the mesh weakens. These patterns, these repeated dysfunctions that appear across organizations and industries are not random. They're predictable shadows of imbalanced rings. In the next episode, we'll explore these shadows, the pathologies that quietly break teams long before the symptoms are visible. It's where theory meets reality and where the rings reveal their most practical value. Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit subscribe and like, and I'll see you in episode 8.